This video is about how to get your clients to say yes to participating in a case study. So if you are in B2B marketing and you're watching this video, you know how important case studies are. But sometimes the hardest part of completing a case study is getting your client to agree to participate. Case studies work primarily because they include social proof. So having your client participate in the case study instead of writing it without them is definitely going to make more effective and more persuasive content. When you're trying to get participation from your client, essentially you're asking for two things, and we'll discuss both of them. The first is for them to show up to an interview and participate in the process. And the second is to use their company name and logo as well as the person's name. Both are really important. Let's start with the person showing up for the interview. You can create case studies without actually interviewing your client. People do it all the time. But the best case studies are really based on your client's perspective. Case studies work because they're not you telling the world, this is our product, this is why it works well, this is why it's so great, but someone else who's not biased authentically sharing their version. I also note to my clients, because we create case studies for our clients as a service, I'll also note that my clients find that sometimes their clients describe things in a way that may be a little bit different from the way that they generally talk about things. And that is absolute gold, because your prospects don't necessarily think the way that you do or talk the way that you do. They probably think and talk more like your clients. So getting their words and their perspective on record and part of the case study and driving the narrative is really important. The second aspect is to use their company name and logo as well as their name. This is really important because the reader, you want to entice the reader with, look at this company just like yours, or look at this super credible company. If they're working with us and they say these things and we solve their problems, why can't we do the same for you? It's really powerful and plays into the entire aspect of social proof. So the secondary piece to that is using their name, their title, but that's usually not a challenge. The challenge is getting their company to agree to use the logo and therefore allow you to use their name and image as well. So now that we've gone over why it's important and what we're asking for, let's go over a few tips to increase the odds of getting a yes to each of those aspects, and then a couple final general tips. So before we start, the most important part to all of this that supersedes everything that I say is have great clients and do great work for them. If you don't make your clients happy and your clients don't like you, it really doesn't matter how well you set up a case study, what you offer them, or what you do. And if you do great work for your clients, you'll probably find this process goes pretty smoothly. So let's talk about getting them to show up for the process. So this is really just them agreeing to give you some of their time. We're not yet talking about permission to name them and talk about the specifics, but you're asking them for a favor. They have to use their time to show up for the interview as well as review the content. So there's a few things that you can do in the beginning to increase the odds that they're willing to give you some of their time. And the first thing is to be very clear about what you're doing. Don't mask the interview. You're going to set up a case study interview. Don't pretend it's to collect their feedback or anything else. You want to explain exactly what you're doing. You want to explain how long it's going to take them. We typically take about 20 minutes for an interview. We put 30 minutes in the calendar, but we tell them it usually takes about 20 minutes, and 90% of the time we're under 25 minutes. Another thing you can do is show them other case studies that you've done so they can kind of see what the final result is, which will make them more comfortable participating in that process. And as always, make it very clear that they're going to get a chance to review the content before it's published. So the idea to get them to give you some of their time, the important aspects are to really lay out exactly what you're doing. You don't want them to, people don't want to agree to participate in a project if they don't know what's going to take from them and it seems like it doesn't, no one's controlling it, doesn't know where they're going. We've heard stories about, people trying to do case studies taking hours of the client's time, tons of back and forth, and that's what people want to avoid. So you want to make it very clear from the beginning that you have a tight process. You know exactly what it's going to do. Here's how it's going to work, and you're going to show that to them. Finally, and we'll discuss this later, a small incentive, if they're hesitant, like a discount in your product, a gift card is something that you can consider if they're really strapped for time and you know that kind of getting that 30 minutes on their calendar is a big deal for them. Next, let's talk about using the company name and logo. This is actually the more tricky part most of the time. If you have a good client, they're usually willing to give you some of their time, but sometimes they don't control whether you can use their company name and logo. So they're, setting it up correctly is going to give you the best chance of getting that permission. And if not, finding out early on if you're not going to be able to use their company name and logo so that you don't waste the time creating the content, going through the process, and then being surprised at the end when, someone from, their legal department, for example, says, oh, you actually can't use this. So my first tip to every single client who hires us to do case studies is start with the companies that have already given you permission to use their logo. So most companies have logos on their website or G2 crowd reviews, Capterra reviews, testimonials that have been approved to publish. Start with those. Most of the time, if they've already given you that permission to publish their logo on your website, they're going to allow you to publish their logo in a case study. So these are the low-hanging fruit. I also want to point out that most of the time, this doesn't have to or shouldn't be a complicated process. I'm giving you tips to increase your odds, but if you're doing things right, just directly making the request will often suffice. Just saying, we're creating content to show how we help customers like you. We want to feature you in a case study and use your company's name and logo so that others can see the work that we do. And that will work most of the time. That said, depending on the situation, it might not be that simple. So some of the challenges and how you can address them are, first and foremost, the person that you work with may not have permission or the ability to give you permission to use their company name and logo. The bigger the company is, the more likelihood that they're going to have a legal department, a PR or marketing team that needs to review and approve anything that is going to be published with their logo. In this situation, it's best to, you don't want to, it can be very difficult for them to go to their legal and marketing department and get that formal permission up front. So in this situation, what we recommend is getting kind of like a conditional permission from the client. So basically, get them to talk to, if they are not able to approve it themselves, find out what department internally needs to approve it and get them to just ask in theory if this is something that, you guys will be comfortable with. And if so, do the case study and then send it for their review. And the benefit here is instead of kind of trying to get the formal permission up front, that legal department or marketing team, it's very difficult for them to say yes before they've seen it. So don't ask for the formal permission, get the conditional approval, and then write the case study in a way that doesn't give away anything confidential, that makes them look good, and then submit it for that final approval. So it really matters who your contact is. If you're working with a small company and you work directly with the CEO, they're going to be able to approve it themselves. On the other end of the spectrum, Fortune 500 companies, especially consumer brands, are usually going to have some process or someone who has to review the case study that's not someone you work with. And your job is to get the person that you work with to talk to that department to get them comfortable with it before the case study starts, and then write content that all parties are going to be comfortable with. Finally, anytime you're doing this, and when we do case studies, we remind them multiple times throughout the process, you're going to get a chance to review and approve the content before it's finalized. So we say this when we get the introduction to the client before we set up the interview. We say it during the interview. So throughout the process, you want to minimize the person getting worried that something's going to be published that they're not comfortable with and therefore dropping out of the process. So continuously remind them that they're going to get to review and approve the content before it's published, so they feel in control of what they're creating. A couple other, random tips that we've seen some of our clients do to get case studies done. First, I think I mentioned this earlier in the video, is to offer incentives. That can be a discount on our product, a free feature, a gift card to a restaurant near them, really anything. You might be surprised to hear that most of my clients don't do this. They find that just asking the client works well, but your client base and your relationship with them. If you've got a few big clients who you work with all the time, and your team is on the phone with them every week, they're probably going to be willing to give you some of their time to describe the relationship. On the other hand, if your company has tens of thousands of customers and you barely ever talk to them, they're not going to feel that kind of personal connection that makes them want to participate in the case study. So that's where kind of a small incentive can go a long way. Next, in situations where it's going to be difficult to get approval, you want, instead of just saying that they're going to get to review and approve the content, you want to make sure that they know that this case study is going to be a win for them. You're going to position them at the forefront of their industry. They're going to be the hero here. You're going to be talking about how you support their success, but the headline is going to be their success. So you want to make the person and the company feel like they're getting good free publicity by being in your case study. This can help a lot. Finally, as a backup, and we'll discuss some of the details of this in a whole separate video, you can do a case study that is not approved for broad, full distribution. That's often the hardest part, where companies are fine participating and, some people reading about what they do, but they don't want it put into marketing campaigns or featured on their website. Obviously, this isn't ideal. You want to be able to use the case study everywhere, and the client most of the time, should and will be comfortable with that. But it's always an option to restrict or control where it's used. The final tip is to make sure the right person asks for participation. So you don't want the request to come from, basically a random person in marketing that they've never met. Now, if you already know they're super likely to say yes, maybe that's okay. But typically we advise, it's usually a customer success person. The person who has the closest relationship with the client is the person who should make that request, even if they're not going to be executing the case study, because, doing this to some extent is a favor for you. And if, so it's, pretty obvious that you want the person who has that personal relationship with the client to make the ask. Wrapping up here, there's no magic bullet to get your clients to participate in case studies, except to do great work for your clients and make sure they love your product or service. But the tips that I've gone over here, and having a good system for making the requests and completing the case study, will increase your odds. Sometimes it's just not going to be possible, whether it's because you're in a super confidential industry like cybersecurity, where there's confidentiality issues, or your clients are all Fortune 100 brands. You might not be able to, in which case there are other options for completing case studies, whether that's an anonymous case study, controlling where it's used. There's several options, and that will be the topic for our next video. I hope you found this helpful. If you need help with your case studies, my company is called SuccessKit. Our website is successkit.io, and all we do is case studies for B2B companies. So we have an amazing process. We have templates that you can use to make all of these requests, make sure your clients understand exactly what's going on, and give you the best chance of getting yes from them. Hope you found this helpful. Stay tuned for our next video.